1 Timothy 4, just to kind of give us a jumping off spot. First Timothy 4, let's start in verse 6, and we're going to read the rest of that chapter there. But Paul, obviously writing to Timothy, he says, "If thou put the brethren in remembrance of these things, thou shalt be a good minister of Jesus Christ." And then he says, "Nourished up in the words of faith and of good doctrine, whereunto thou hast attained. But refuse profane and old wives' fables, and exercise thyself rather unto godliness. For bodily exercise profiteth little, but godliness is profitable unto all things, having promise of the life that now is, and of that which is to come. This is a faithful thing, and worthy of all acceptation. For therefore we both labor and suffer reproach, because we trust in the living God, who is the Savior of all men, especially of those that believe. These things command and teach. Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word, and in conversation, and charity, and spirit, and faith, and purity, till I come. Give attendance to reading, to exhortation," and here we see it again, "to doctrine. Neglect not the gift that is in thee, which was given thee in prophecy, with the laying on of the hands of the presbytery. Meditate upon these things. Give thyself wholly unto them, that thy profiting may appear to all. Take heed unto thyself and unto the doctrine. Continue in them, for in doing this thou shalt both save thyself and them that hear thee." The Bible makes no pains to go to any length to say that doctrine is not important. 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, basically all the epistles of Paul are, even if they're not referencing doctrine by the word, are writing doctrine. They're giving us doctrine. It's giving us things to teach, things which we are to hold to, things which we are to learn, and things which we are to hold as dear. And this is one thing that we'll talk about this more in just a moment. But one thing that, and it's not just the New Apostolic Reformation, but one thing that a lot of groups, a lot of neo-evangelical or even cultish groups do is they diminish the doctrines of Scripture. And they try to do away with or twist or warp or turn them into something else. They simply refuse to just read the Bible and take the Bible for what it says and the doctrine that it teaches. And that's certainly something that we see in the New Apostolic Reformation. And so what I want to talk about tonight, and I'll get to more in that in a moment. What I want to talk about tonight is kind of the influence of this particular group. And I'm going to use two specific things that they do, and they do very well. Two specific things to kind of give us an idea of the influence. Now, it would be impossible to have a full grasp on not just the national influence of this here in America, but the global influence of this group, because it is a wide-stretching, wide-ranging organization, or really, I shouldn't say organization, I should say movement, with people and churches and various groups that are associated with it literally in all parts of the world. And so this is in large part due to their theology, which we've talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but their theology of dominion, right? This is what they want to do. They believe that they are going to bring the kingdom of God back by taking dominion over the earth. And so they intentionally put their hands in as many places as they can. And so they've done this in various ways. Of course, they have the 7 Mountain Mandate, which we talked about, which basically boils all of culture down to 7 very specific areas: education, religion, politics, business, that kind of thing. And they're doing this. They are very intentional about doing this. And so they're making inroads in the world of politics, and they do this in a variety of ways, not only having candidates that are associated with them running for various political offices, but probably the biggest way they do this is just over their vast influence. They have hundreds of millions of people who are directly involved with this movement. And if you can control how those hundreds of millions of people vote, you have a big say in politics. But even beyond that, they have made it all the way to the White House as Paula White, which I think her name has changed. She got remarried, and so she might not be known as Paula White anymore. But Paula White, who is very much associated with the New Apostolic Reformation, was Donald Trump's spiritual advisor and pastor. I don't know if that's if he would still claim her as his pastor, which she's not, by the very fact that she's a female, but nevertheless, but she was Donald Trump's spiritual advisor. If you remember when he was sworn in, she's the one who prayed when Donald Trump was sworn in. And so she had obviously vast influence over the politics of America. So they've made tremendous inroads in that area. They have a number of worldwide organizations, and I'll just list one. This is probably one of the biggest that is not a church. And so they have this organization called Harvest International Ministry. This is run by this man, Che-On. Che-On is one of the biggest worldwide recognized members of the group. And he is an apostle, according to them. But this Harvest International Ministry reaches millions of people, and they have stations in over 65 countries. And so you can that gives you a little bit of an idea of the global scale of this group. They have popular schools that teach a large number of disciplines. And just to give you an idea of this, just Bethel Church alone, just this one arm of the New Apostolic Reformation, just Bethel Church, they have their Bethel Christian School, which is a pre-K through middle school. They have the Conservatory of the Arts. They have a School of Music. They have a School of Technology. And then they have their School of Supernatural Ministry. I mean, this is just a variety of schools teaching a variety of disciplines just in this one church, and they boast thousands of alumni. And so, again, that's just one city in America where they're doing this. And so just from that, you can get an idea of the scope of the influence of this particular group. But I want to focus in a little bit tonight, because what concerns me more than their push into the secular world is their influence over the church, right? That concerns me more than what they're doing in schools and things like that. That concerns me, it does. But what concerns me more is their influence over the church, and that is an influence that is growing rapidly. And so what I want to talk about tonight are two specific areas and ways in which they have gained an influence in the church. And I want to take a little bit of a closer look at these. So the first is their push for ecumenicalism. And so one way in which this movement has grown is their push to have this ecumenical hand-holding with all these various religions, all these various ideologies, these various groups. And they do this quite a bit. They are very intentionally vague. If you go on to the churches that are directly associated, and by the way, when you talk about this group, there are churches like Bethel that are just directly a part of it, and then you have kind of adjacent churches that might not be directly associated with it, but maybe maybe Bill Johnson will go speak at that church, or maybe they'll have Bethel Music come play concerts at their church. They may not be teaching all the things that the New Apostolic Reformation teaches, but they're very much closely associated with it. And so this is another reason why it would be almost impossible to understand or fully grasp the extent of the influence that they have. But when you talk about churches that are really directly involved with it, or organizations like Harvest International, these people that are directly involved with it, when you go look at if they have on their websites or whatever, if they have a what we believe page, or this is our doctrine, none of it is very specific. It's all usually pretty short. And it's kind of vague. They use generalities a lot. They don't get into any specific detail. And the reason is very clear when you begin to study this particular organization, is because what they care more about doctrine is experience. That's what they push. They want people to have a good experience more so than they want people to understand their doctrine. Because if you can have people leaving your church or your organization, whatever, if you can have these people leaving and having felt something, then that's a pretty good hook to get them to come back. And so they really push experience. This is from Bethel's website. Bethel's mission is revival, the personal, regional, and global expansion of God's kingdom through his manifest presence. God's presence is one of the, if not the biggest key words for this group. God's presence. They want you to feel God's presence. They want you to experience God's presence. They want you to pray for God's presence. You come to our group. You come to our church. You come listen to this man or this woman preach, and you're going to experience God. Right? This is a key term for them, and you see it all over the place. And so the reason they do this is because to refuse to draw hard lines in the sand, to say this is our doctrine and we won't bend on this, to refuse to draw hard lines in the sand is to open the door for fellowship with those of various belief systems. And that's what they want to do. They want to bring in people, and we'll talk about more in just a second why they want to do that. But nevertheless, there has been a huge increase in the number of non-denominational churches, which feeds into this idea of ecumenicism. Now, I didn't know this. I was surprised by this. Since 2021, so for the past 3 years, non-denominational Protestants outnumber mainline Protestants in the U.S. And when talking about mainline Protestants, you can have the debate about Baptists, but they consider Baptist Protestant, right? And so Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist, all these kinds of mainline Protestants, if you were to put all of them together and all of the non-denominational Protestants, there are now more non-denominational Protestants than mainline Protestants in America, and has so for the past 3 years. I was very surprised with this, actually. I would not have guessed that. Now, obviously, not every non-denominational church is a part of that movement. I'm not trying to say the second somebody takes Baptist off their sign and they're now non-denominational, that they are fully, part of the New Apostolic Reformation. But its rise in number is clearly linked with the popularity of this movement. Because the whole, shtick for a non-denominational church is we're breaking down denominational walls, right? I mean, this is something that they talk about all the time. We want to break down denominational walls, and to do that is to break down the doctrines that divide, right? They are, whether or not they're intentional about it, they are directly feeding into this idea of ecumenicism. And so this is something that is fed into the popularity of the movement. Now, the movement has been reaching out to Rome for quite some time. In fact, they have quite a good relationship with Roman Catholics, which might be surprising. Back in 2016, there was a meeting held between the Pope and several New Apostolic Reformation leaders. And it was a small meeting just between them. In this meeting was, amongst others, but there was Che On, I mentioned him earlier with Harvest International, Mike Bickle. Mike Bickle was the founder of the International House of Prayer in Kansas City, and that has sparked a global movement of what they refer to as IHOP centers, International House of Prayer, he's recently come into some controversy, but Mike Bickle was a kind of a big name in the movement, and then Chris Valaton. Chris Valaton is the chief prophet of Bethel Church, and so right after Bill Johnson, Chris Valaton is this number 2 guy at Bethel. And there were others, but these are maybe the biggest names in the group. But it is interesting that it was the Pope specifically with N.A.R leaders. It wasn't just like it was the Pope reaching out to Protestants. No, it was the Pope and the New Apostolic Reformation. Chris Valaton would later say about this particular meeting. Now listen to what he says. This week I had the privilege of meeting with Pope Francis. It was probably one of the highlights of my life. That's what he said. One of the highlights of my life. He was funny, warm, and very spiritual. I was invited along with several other pastors to a small Connect forum with Pope Francis because he has a deep passion for unity among believers. That's another big word, unity, right? That's a huge word. And so, but notice what he says, right? Not only the highlight of my life thing, but he was funny, warm, and very spiritual. Not doctrinal. He was spiritual, right? Because you can be very spiritual and have just terrible doctrine, which is the truth for basically everybody in this organization. Just last year in Lisbon, Portugal, there was a massive event. I think they referred to it as the Change. There was this huge ecumenical movement where you had New Apostolic Reformation people and Roman Catholics that came together in this one event in Portugal. There was music put on by both Catholic and N.A.R performers. So Bethel Music performed. I'm blanking on the guy's name, but there's a well-known Catholic singer-songwriter. He performed. They were performing together. Bill Johnson, it's not necessarily Bethel, but Bill Johnson Ministries raised $1 million for the event. Jonathan Rumi is the guy who plays Jesus on The Chosen. He's a Catholic. He spoke at the event. And so this was a huge event, which was specifically for ecumenicism, right? We're going to grab these people and Catholics. We're going to bring it all together. Now, why is this such a big deal? The ecumenical agenda is a popular one. It's very popular today because it claims to unify believers under the banner of love, right? And so you can already understand why this would be popular today. We're going to strip away all the doctrine. We're going to strip away all the things that divide us because division is ugly. We don't like division. We're going to strip all that away, and we're all going to come together because at the end of the day, we all love Jesus. Right? And so we can hold hands and we can worship together and we can experience God together and we can do all of that because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is that we love Jesus. Well, I would push back on that because of, for one thing, what we just read in 1 Timothy, where Paul specifically over and over, not just here but in other portions of Scripture, talks about the importance of doctrine. There's a reason why we have denominations. There's a reason why we have denominational walls. There's a reason why I don't go preach for Methodists, why I don't go fellowship with people of certain belief systems, because at the end of the day, a lot of the times I don't think they even believe in the same Jesus that I believe in. And so, no, I can't just do this under the banner of love and under the banner of unity. But this is a very appealing thing for people who see denominationalism as an apparent evil. And this is becoming more and more true. There's a big push today that is very anti-denominationalism. You shouldn't be a part of a denomination because that's not even biblical, they would say. However, what ends up happening, and this is the ironic thing, what ends up happening is they want to say, right, we're stripping away the doctrine, everybody, we're just there to love Jesus. But for the New Apostolic Reformation, what they're saying is, I want you to strip everything you believe, and you can come fellowship with me as long as you believe what I believe. Because at the end of the day, they're not going to drop their belief on apostles. They're not dropping their beliefs on the fivefold ministry. They're not dropping their beliefs on spiritualism and all the things that are going on in the church. And I'll probably get to some of that in another week. But some of the quote-unquote spiritualistic things that are taking place in the church, they're not dropping those beliefs. And so when they say ecumenicism, they say you don't believe, your fundamentalist ways, which, what they would call me about me. You don't believe your fundamentalist stuff, and then you can come fellowship with us. That's really what they mean at the end of the day. But this has been one way in which they have grown just absolutely rapidly, is because they want to reach out across the aisle and just fellowship with every person who makes any kind of claim of not even really of Christianity, any kind of claim of spirituality, right? As long as you're a spiritual person, then you're good to go. And then the second thing, and this one is far and away the biggest influence that they have right now, is their music. There's major players in the New Apostolic Reformation when it comes to music. Even if you have no idea who their pastor is, even if you have no idea who their church is, more than likely, if you have turned on the radio, you have heard their music. And so this is a worldwide, a huge global phenomenon right now is the music coming out of the New Apostolic Reformation. And it has really for about, we'll say, the past 15 or so years. Now, and I've talked about this a little bit, but one reason why it's so popular, just removing the doctrine of the music, removing all that, just from a purely technical standpoint, the music they produce, nobody's producing better music from a technical standpoint right now. They pump millions of dollars into this. And so just from a pure talent standpoint, nobody's getting better musicians. Nobody's getting better vocalists, right? I mean, they are paying for the top of the line, and they're producing top of the line music, just again from a production standpoint. And so it is the highest quality you could possibly ask for. It is created for the express purpose of emotion and feeling, which naturally draws people. They want to hear that kind of music, and they're hooked on that kind of music. And they are good at producing emotion and feeling. The way that they produce these songs, just even if you listen to it without lyrics, just the way that they produce the music in and of itself is produced in such a way to evoke emotion in the person listening to it. I found this quote interesting. This is by a woman named Darlene, and I'm probably going to mispronounce her last name, but I think it's Darlene Sheck, okay? She used to be a worship leader of Hillsong, and I might be mistaken on this, but I believe that this was the original Hillsong in Australia. There's several campuses, but I think that she was the worship leader of the original one. But her quote says this: "Our praise is irresistible to God. As soon as he hears us call his name, he is ready to answer us. That is the God we serve. Every time the praise and worship team with our musicians, singers, production teams, dancers, and actors begin to praise God, look at this, his presence comes in like a flood. Even though we live in his presence, His love is lavished on us in a miraculous way when we praise him. Here's why I found this quote so fascinating. First of all, they are very open about the fact that they're what you call worship services, and the things they do. It is a production. It is a production, and even she even says our production teams, they are spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year just to put on their quote unquote worship services, just from a production standpoint. But what I found so fascinating about this is, look at this. What she's claiming is that this is what it takes. It takes musicians, singers, production teams, dancers, actors. It takes all of this for it to be what it takes for a Christian to experience the lavish love of God. If you were to strip all that away, and you just took one of their musicians and just had one person up on stage with a microphone, and you took away all the musicians, and you took away the singers, and you took away the dancers, and you took away the hundreds of thousands of dollars of light shows that they put on every week, and you took away the fog, and you actually put light up there, and it's not dark, right? If you stripped away the production of it, and you just put one single person up there leading people in songs about Christ, what she's trying to say is, you probably aren't going to experience the lavish love of God. And so, again, that's what they want. That's what they push. They push experience. And that's what that music will do. Again, it's produced in such a way to produce these big crescendos of emotion and feeling, and you see people just kind of go into this euphoria while they listen to it. And if you can get them that way, then you've got them. There was a video that I saw that I thought, again, I found very interesting. This was from a Bethel Music worship service. The congregation was all singing together. I don't know what song it was, but the congregation were all singing together. The singing had concluded. There was about 20 seconds or so where there was a guy on the stage who was kind of singing something into the mic, but the congregation had concluded. There was at least a 90-second interval after the congregation had finished singing, where the music was playing, and it was just very light, and it's what the best way I could explain it was as a meditation style musical interlude. Okay, I think probably you understand what I'm talking about. Literally for 90 seconds at least, nobody said anything. People are just sitting there swaying. Like I said, they look like they're in some kind of euphoria. No music no lyrics are being spoken. Nobody's singing. It's just this music being played. And then I don't know her name, one of the music leaders, one of the women on the stage, she said, quote, "Your mind doesn't even have to understand what's happening. It doesn't matter. Just let your spirit receive fully what God's doing through the sound in this moment." Get that? You don't even have to understand what's happening to you right now. Just experience it. And if you experience it, just know you've had a spiritual encounter with God. That's what they'll tell you. And as I've said this so many times, not just in this study, but when we preach through 1 Corinthians, I don't deny the spiritual experiences that these people are having. I deny the source of it. Can Satan and his ministers produce spiritual experiences? You bet they can. You bet they can. And so this is why this one of the many reasons why this movement is so dangerous is because they absolutely are producing spiritual experiences. And this is one of the reasons why it's so popular, and one of the reasons why they're growing so much is because they're producing spiritual experiences and emotion and feeling better than anybody else is doing it right now. It's just, I don't think it's coming from the right source. And this is a dangerous thing. And so the music isn't just popular on streaming sites. It is. I mean, I looked it up, and it's hard to kind of get concrete numbers on this, but I was looking on Spotify. Spotify is kind of the big name in music streaming right now. And Spotify, they kind of list the streaming numbers for, I think I was looking at like the top 25 current Christian songs. And we're talking about millions of streams. I mean, so these things are, it's not just this little niche, thing that church people are listening to. No, they have a huge appeal, both in Christian circles and secular circles. Part of the reason is, like I talked about earlier, for the production value of the music that they're putting out. But they're very popular. But it's not just popular on streaming sites. It's also being used in churches all over the world. And this is the one area where even what we might consider good, doctrinal, sound churches, probably, I think, more often than not, in ignorance, are paying, because you have to pay, are paying to sing music being produced by these movements. There are churches all over the world singing these songs. I thought this was a very helpful article. I found this website, worshipleaderresearch.com. This particular website did a study of the, I'll try and explain this, a little bit confusing. They did a study of the top 25 songs used in churches. They're not talking about streaming. They're not talking about people going to YouTube and watching music videos. They're talking about songs used specifically in churches, and I'll talk to you how they gather that data. The top 25 songs used in churches from the years 2010 to 2020, so they studied a full decade. And they found 38 songs that made up the top 25 for the entire decade. That in and of itself was kind of a crazy stat, but here's how they did this. They amongst other things, the two big things they did is they looked at CCLI purchases and praise chart purchases. Now let me explain what that is. If you are singing contemporary Christian music that is copyrighted, and you want to, we put the lyrics up for the hymns that we sing. If you want to cast the lyrics or produce them on a bulletin, or if you want to print them or project them in any way, if you're doing that with contemporary Christian music, you have to buy a CCLI purchase, or you can get sued, okay? And so anybody putting out contemporary music that is copyrighted, which is, basically everything, if your church is doing this, you have to purchase a CCLI license. And so they took the CCLI purchasing data, which shows which churches are buying it, and in some cases, what songs they're buying it for. Because you can go in and purchase individual songs. Most people just buy a general license, which covers most of it. And so they use CCLI purchase data, but they also looked at praise charts. And praise charts is a very popular website for churches to go purchase sheet music. Okay, and so you buy the CCLI license to be able to display the lyrics, and then you go to praise charts and you buy the music so that your band can play it. Okay, and so they took those two, amongst other things, but they took those two things and they ran the data on this, and they found, again, only 38 songs, over a full decade, only 38 songs made the top 25 for a full decade. And so that means that most of the songs were considered the top 25 for the full 10 years that they were studying this. They quoted on their website, we found there to be a mere 38 songs. That's right, in a decade, only 38 titles were among the top 25 songs sung in churches. Now here's why I bring this up. 37 out of those 38 songs had either a direct or an indirect link to the New Apostolic Reformation. 37 out of the 38. Most of them came directly from 4 different groups, all of whom were directly a part of the New Apostolic Reformation. Of note are Bethel and Hillsong, but there are others. Of the songs that churches were singing, and again, we're not talking about hymns, right? Of the songs that churches were singing for that full decade, 2010 to 37 of the 38 top songs were directly linked to this particular group. That same group, Worship Leader Research, did a survey of over 400 worship leaders from various backgrounds, various denominations, various ideologies, and they asked them this question: when considering a song for congregational use, how important is the song's association with an artist or church to your decision on whether to use it? And then they gave specific examples. Would you use a song from Bethel Music? Would you use a song from Elevation? Would you use a song from this group or this individual, right? So they listed out. But then they asked them, right, if you are the worship leader for your church and you hear this new song, you think it's great, do you go look up who produced it? Do you care who produced it? If you find out who produced it, is there a chance that you won't sing it? And so that same survey said that 44% of the over 400 people that they interviewed or questioned said that it wasn't important. It wasn't important. They don't care. That same survey showed that those questioned, those same 400 plus, were very likely or somewhat likely, so I'm combining those, very likely or somewhat likely to sing music from Bethel. 48% said Bethel. 54% said Elevation. 61% said Hillsong. 61% of over 400 worship leaders in churches, these aren't just random people, these are people leading in churches today. 61% of them said, I'm pretty likely to sing a song of Hillsong is to put it out. Now, what does that tell you? That tells you that either they don't know who Hillsong is and what they're producing, or they do know who Hillsong is and what they're producing, and they just don't care. And so, again, at the end of the day, they have, and I read you the quote a couple weeks ago from Bill Johnson, that they are doing this intentionally. This isn't just something that they enjoy doing. They just like making music. No, they intentionally make music for the purposes of getting their influence out into the world. That's why they do it. And they're good at it. And they're pumping music out at just insane rates. And they have all these groups that they put out. And they're good at what they do, and people are buying it, and people are listening to it, and people are singing it. Now, again, I'll say this, and I think I mentioned this last week. That doesn't mean that every single song they produce has heretical lyrics. That's not what that means. But that does mean that there's a good percentage of the music they produce that does either have consistently heretical lyrics or lyrics that really just try to influence people to accept the phrases and the ideology, authority, fire, experience, right? All of these are words that you're going to hear in these songs quite a bit. And they're very, very me-centered. They're me-focused songs. And so it's not just about Christ and what he's done. It's specifically about what Christ has done for me. It's how Christ can help me. It's how I was in a bad situation and Christ brought me out. You read through the lyrics on almost every one of the songs, and I and me. It's very me-centered, me-focused music, which again is kind of the point, because it's relational, and it's something that I can hear that and I can think, oh, there was this time, and I do remember God doing this for me, and so it's something that draws people in, and again they're kind of. I think I could honestly say they're being really deceptive, because they're not trying to just put out music just for the sake of worshiping Christ. That's not what they're doing. They're trying to draw people into their movement, and so this is. I think if I can figure out a good way to put it together, I'm probably going to do a whole lesson just on kind of the theology of their music, and why. It might be dangerous in certain aspects. And so, but because their music is, like I said, hands down, the biggest way in which they're drawing people to their movement right now. But the influence of this group, like I said at the very beginning, there's no possible way with any degree of certainty to understand the vastness of the influence that they hold. They, like I said, they have their hands in everything. And a lot of times it's done in ways in which can't even be quantified or qualified. We don't know. I'll give you an example of this. There was a movie that came out a few years ago. I'm trying to remember the name of it now. I can't remember. I was telling you about it. There was a movie that came out a few years ago about a woman who used to work for Planned Parenthood and then came out of Planned Parenthood. Unplanned. Yeah, I think that's what it's called, Unplanned. It was pretty successful as far as kind of Christian movies go. It was they had a good run in the movie theater, and overall, I wouldn't have really any complaints with the movie itself. I never saw it, but I'm just saying, as far as the message of anything anti-Planned Parenthood, I'm for. But I was reading an article about this movie, and the woman who was writing the article is one of the most outspoken people of the N.A.R movement, and she said she went to go see it. And she was very surprised because at one point, Chris Valaton was in the movie. As I told you earlier, he's the chief prophet of Bethel. And so she said that kind of spurred me to kind of study this a little bit. And come to find out, Bethel wasn't really over the production, but heavily kind of influenced the production of the whole movie. And like I told you, they have a school, Conservatory of Arts, where they're teaching acting and singing and all this kind of, so and I told you last week, I think, about the movie Come Out in Jesus' Name, a deliverance movie. They're starting to do this. They're starting to produce movies. They're starting to produce, I mean, not starting, they've been producing music for a while. And so, and a lot of times doing it in a kind of uncredited way, right? Not even necessarily associating their name with it, but having their hands on it. And so it's just there's just so many ways in which they've gotten their name out there, gotten their influence out there. It is, I knew coming into this that this was a large movement. I had no idea the depths of it until I really started studying it. And so it is, to use the word I used earlier, it is quite concerning. Okay.